This is episode number 1 with Nick Tuminello.
Nobody's saying not to do cardio, especially if you like it. What I'm simply trying to communicate is that the common dogma around the fitness world is that, oh, you're trying to lose fat? Oh, get on that cardio, step up that cardio, as if cardio is the magic bullet to fat loss. It is not.
What's up? Welcome to Anchors of Health. I'm your host, Bill Choi. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today's show is all about asking relevant questions that you guys want to know about fat loss, exercise, and nutrition. That's why I brought on Nick Tuminello, who's considered one of the best personal trainers in the world, in the fitness world. He's done it all. He's worked with a wide range of clients, from NFL athletes to NBA players to MMA fighters to figure girls and bodybuilders. But more importantly, everyday working professionals just like you, of all ages and fitness levels. So he has a tremendous amount of experience. He now spends a bulk of his time traveling the world, helping other trainers become great trainers. It was an honor having him on the show, so I hope you guys will get a lot out of this. Here's Coach Nick. What's up, everybody? I'm so happy to welcome Nick Tuminello to the show today. He's NSCA's 2016 Personal Trainer of the Year, the trainer of trainers, and someone I've been learning from for a very long time because everything he says and puts out is always high quality with a lot of thought and experience behind it. Nick, thank you so much for being here.
I really appreciate you having me. I'm grateful for your compliments, and I'm honored to, be on the platform here. So thanks for everything you're doing for the community, the fitness community.
Definitely. So Nick, you got 2 fantastic books out right now. The first is Strength Training for Fat Loss, and the second is Building Muscle and Performance. Love them both, but today the focus is going to be on your first book. So before we get into that, I thought we'd start off with a question that I think will answer a lot of questions that people have, and that's, how would you characterize your training philosophy, and what are some of the things that helped shape it to what it is today?
That's a great question. So I'm going to answer in a more general manner, and then a specific manner towards the actual fat loss concept, which is what you want to focus on. So the training philosophy is really simple. It's about individualizing exercise prescription. Now, that just really has to do with the goals, because not every training method is best for every goal, and no one method, one training approach is best for all goals. And when I say training approach, we have, bodybuilding approaches and powerlifting approaches and sports performance approaches and hybrid types approaches, which blend certain things. So I would say I certainly promote more of a blend, because there's benefits and limitations to all those all those methods. Now, in regards to fat loss, I would say there's certainly a philosophy there, which is to maximize the metabolic demand of the workout versus if I was training someone to maximize muscle development, the approach would be just what I just said, to train in a way that maximizes response to stimulate muscle adaptation, size adaptations. So that's the philosophy, is based on principles of specificity. What is the goal? And then how do we need to train you in order to best achieve that goal? The philosophy is not based on a method, kettlebells or powerlifting or bodybuilding or my personal preferences.
Love that. A lot of key takeaways you just mentioned. With so many different approaches out there, it's about fitting exercises to you versus the other way around. Big difference right there. Now, here's something that I've always admired about you. It's your ability to bridge the gap between scientific evidence and the practical application of it in the real world. You do a brilliant job of applying the science. Can you talk about why this is important?
Well, I appreciate the compliment, and I think what you just said, really why it's important, is really in the question. It's, if you can't use knowledge, then it's really not useful, right? So it's really not benefiting us. We always joke, we'll say, oh, well, that's kind of like a Jeopardy knowledge, right? Good if you're on Jeopardy, but doesn't really help you in your everyday life. So science is a very valuable method to help evaluate, objective reality, the reality that we all share. Reality is about how the human body works and understand patterns and make predictions. But if all that data is not put into use, then we're not benefiting from it. So I try to help us all benefit from it by talking about how this data would apply on a regular, everyday, exercise-related setting.
Right, and I definitely wanted to get into some of that, but you open up in the intro of your book with this: most diets are based on fads that come and go like clothing styles. This book, however, isn't based on fads and miracle claims. It's based on scientifically founded training principles, sensible and realistic nutritional strategies, consistency, and hard work. Can you fill us in on some of those principles? What are the general universal principles of fat loss and training that are repeatedly shown in the research?
Good. Well, I really like the way you framed the question. Principles that are repeatedly shown. Principles are universal. Methods are individual. So the principle is for fat loss comes down to this: being in a caloric deficit. Now, before I go any further, let me just clarify something, because I've had this conversation with many people, and as soon as you start talking about calories, the first thing that people think that you're rejecting the fact that nutrient density matters. They go, oh, well, the quality of the calories. Of course, the quality of the calories matter, but a calorie is still a calorie in that it's a unit of heat. All right, just because it comes from high protein or high carbs or high fat, it's still a calorie. So if you're not in a caloric deficit, you could still keep fat on from eating high nutrient dense, i.e. whole foods, if you're eating more calories than you're burning. All right. So you have to be in a caloric deficit. That is a universal, non-negotiable, so well evidenced, it's not up for debate type of principle. Now, how do you create the caloric deficit? Well, basically 3 ways. 1, you either eat less calories than you burn, or you increase your exercise or activity level to burn more calories, or you do a combination of the two, which is probably a more smarter approach. That way you don't take any one of the other two to an extreme. That's really the main principle. So when it comes to then exercising, we also look at evidence in regards to the common question, well, what's the best form? Is it cardio versus weights? Well, if you're looking for purely caloric expenditure, cardio is going to be, superior. However, you're not going to gain much muscle from cardio, so it's not going to really increase the shape of your body. Muscle is what forms the shape of your body. And you're not going to increase tendon strength and all the other things that resistance training benefits from. So that's where the diet part comes in. Instead of trying to get on the treadmill or the bike or whatever to try to burn that extra 300 calories, my recommendation is to create the caloric deficit, fulfill that principle by watching, what you eat. Trying to, monitor your calories in. And then from an exercise perspective, focus on using resistance training. That doesn't mean not doing cardio, but not making it your primary source to increase in the function and shape of your body. And we also know that a principle of overload. If you create overload in your body by working against resistances, putting force across tissues, load across joints, that's what resistance training does, then you're going to get stronger and build tissue strength and build muscle in the ways that are specific to the way you exercised it. So if you do bicep curls, all the joints and muscles involved in performing that movement will get stronger and improve their shape.
Excellent description that you just provided us with right there. My next question is, so in your book, you also talked about muscle as a metabolically active tissue. Can you explain what you mean by this and why you need muscle to effectively burn fat?
Sure. So this is actually, I'm glad you asked me this question, because this is something that I could probably do a better job of clarifying here. First off, it's important to understand that fat is also metabolically active tissue. That's something I failed to say in the book, and I probably should have for clarification's sake. It just means that a lot of people look at muscle as maybe this like cumbersome thing. Well, it actually does help increase your metabolism. Now, there actually is something that I got wrong in my book. As someone who's scientifically minded, you always have to go with where the evidence takes you. What I was unaware of at the time was that there's been evidence that shows that the metabolic activity of muscle in regards to how many calories you burn extra a day by putting on an extra pound of muscle, I severely overestimated in the book. It turns out that putting on an extra pound of muscle only helps you burn about 6 to 10 extra calories per day, where we used to think it burned, some people often believe, as I did, and for anywhere between 30 to 50 extra calories per day. So even though it's not that impressive, there's still many other benefits to having more muscle, as I already talked to, more strength, less risk of injury, Regular exercise obviously helps decrease all-cause mortality, which is basically helps you live longer and more disease-free, at least reduces risk. And we do know that from research that if you have more muscle and you engage in activity, physical activity, you actually have to burn more calories, because having more muscle is like having a bigger engine in your car. You are less fuel efficient with a bigger engine. You have to burn more fuel in order to go the same distance. In a car, obviously that makes your gas more expensive, but in the human body, that's a good thing from a fat loss perspective.
Right, and I'm glad you pointed out something that you overlooked, and that's something that I've always admired about you. You're not afraid to go back and say, "Hey, I might have overlooked something. I need to revisit this." So I appreciate you doing that.
Well, thank you. I wish we all did that. We'd be a lot more accurate information out there.
Right, and you kind of talked about something in that statement that you just said that I think is very important, because I want our audience to kind of get a gauge about realistic expectations and results, because there's a lot of people out there who are making the effort to exercise but give up or feel like there's no point to exercise when they're not seeing any huge drops in weight. A lot of time it's just maintaining weight. So you touched on some of those benefits. What are the benefits that people are rarely talking about?
Man, what a great question. I got to tell you, as many interviews as I've done since this book came out, currently it's 2017 at the time we were doing this interview, and my book came out early 2014. I've never been asked that question, and it is quite a relevant and important question. So I wanted to recognize that. Well, first off, I want to key in on something you just said. You didn't say weight management. You used slightly different terminology. But most of us are really after weight management. We're really not, going back to what I said about being in a caloric deficit. A lot of people, we're working people, family people. Our priorities are those things, right? So exercise is secondary. Doesn't mean it's not important. It's just secondary. It's not something that we're willing to organize our lives around kitchens, gyms, and bathrooms, like a lot of trainers, who are gym rats, right? Or fitness models and people.
Right.
So we're really looking for weight management, and exercise can help you do that. It can help offset, if you're eating a few more calories than maybe normal, then you go work out. Or if you're eating some level of excessive calories, then you go work out and you burn whatever you ate that was excessive there. And now you kind of have you're back to that baseline, right? Where you're not in a caloric deficit, but you're not in a surplus either. You're in that balance. So that's for where most people are. That's more common. And I think that's important to recognize that is okay, because there are multiple well-established health and fitness related benefits to regular exercise. I already started to say them. Reduction in all-cause mortality, less stress, better sleep, overall, strength, less risk of injury, all these sorts of things. Unfortunately, and I would say trainers, in my field, we've done a pretty bad job of feeding into what I'm going to say here, but often we look at exercise as either about physique, how you look, being lean or being really muscular, or performance, increasing, your deadlift or increasing your golf drive. And all those are okay, but we act like if you're not training in one of those directions, then you're kind of spinning your wheels or you're wasting your time. And that's simply not true. Training, this is going to be a stupid saying, but relevant. Training just for the health of it is quite a relevant and quite a realistic, actually, in fact, the most realistic and quite a reasonable goal for most people to have.
Awesome explanation, Nick, because that's really important for people to hear.
Yeah, and it's also not to get frustrated. And maybe you start there and make exercise a regular part of your life. And then if you decide, hey, I really want to lose some fat too, I really want to show off all this hard work, well, then you realize the next step is to also start changing some habits outside of the gym, which are, what are your food choices? And that should start small. Something as simple as maybe going from just drinking a couple sodas to just diet sodas. And I know people get freaked out about not drinking soda or whatever, but if you're a soda drinker and you just try to go right to water and iced tea, you'll probably be pretty damn unhappy, and you might not stick with it. It might be too much of a jump for you. So just going to diet soda might be the first step in getting some calories down. So that's how it works. It's got to be very small, single behavior changes until they become regular behaviors where you're not thinking about them anymore.
Right. Excellent advice. Now, Nick, I know you're very well versed in a variety of different training concepts and methodologies. Of all the methods you could have chosen to use in your book, Why did you choose metabolic strength training as the go-to method for burning fat? And also if you can explain what it is.
Sure. So let me explain what it is first, because that'll be easier to then go back and explain why. So the reason I call it metabolic strength training is because of what's the main purpose of what we're using it for. All right. So metabolic strength training is what I call the 3 C's of resistance training. And the 3 C's are as follows: circuit training, combinations, and complexes. All right. Let me just focus on 2 of the C's because they're the most relevant for the everyday exerciser. Everybody already knows what a circuit is, but just for clarification of communication here, it just means stringing multiple exercises together back to back. A complex is all basically the same as a circuit, except you use the same piece of equipment. And there's no break in transition from going to lat pull downs to lunges to push-ups, right? So a dumbbell complex may be doing dumbbell bent over rows and then dumbbell Romanian deadlifts right to, lift the dumbbells up at your shoulders, then do dumbbell shoulder presses and then put them, hold them at your shoulders in a racked position, and then do dumbbell squats. One after the other, after the other, after the other, no break in between. All right?
Right.
So now, what are the qualities of doing resistance training in that manner versus traditional resistance training that you would see in like a traditional muscle building type approach, where you do like a single set of an exercise and then you rest for 60 seconds, or maybe even do a paired set? All right, well, the goal of that approach, the one I just mentioned, the traditional approach, is to maximize muscular development. The goal of metabolic strength training is to maximize the metabolic demand of the resistance training. So we're trying to maximize a different stimulus. I'm not saying that doing metabolic resistance training won't help you build muscle, and I'm also not saying that a traditional muscle building approach won't help you increase your metabolism. But what part of that are you trying to maximize is what we're looking at. And why metabolic strength training? Well, they have repetitive effort, so you have an extended work time than a traditional resistance training, and they're more total body, so you don't just like do a set of bench press or something like that. You going from a lower body to an upper body to a lower body to an upper body, so multiple muscles, more muscles worked, more energy demand. In client speak, that would be more calories that need to be burned. And they're also higher intensity, and we know that higher intensity, from an effort standpoint, is also more metabolically demanding. So that is the rationale for why, and I just explained the what. One thing I'll just say too, since my book has come out, Strength Training for Fat Loss book has come out, now I was familiar with what the research had shown, but a paper came out, if I remember correctly, in 2016 that is a systematic review meta-analysis. Now, for people who aren't, understanding what that means, it just is basically a study of studies where researchers get together and they look at all the relevant evidence on exercise and fat loss and say, what is the consensus? What does all of it lead? What does all of it say? And so that gives us an idea of where the research is pointing. And the paper concluded that resistance training over the long term was the superior form of exercise over cardio, and that the focus, if fat loss is the goal for fat loss, you should focus on metabolic resistance training. How about that?
And that's something I love that you always do. You're always up to date on the latest research. And you mentioned cardio there, right? You're not telling people not to do cardio, because if they love cardio, they should be doing cardio, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that was it. So let me just expand what you're saying. Yeah, nobody's saying not to do cardio, especially if you like it. I love how you frame the question about personal preference. What I'm simply trying to communicate here, and I think we're on the same page there, is that the common dogma around the fitness world is that, you're trying to lose fat, get on that cardio, step up that cardio, as if cardio is the magic bullet to fat loss. It is not. All right. It does help you burn more calories, but that's pretty much it. It really is basically an additional calorie burning. So you can either, if you're trying to be in a caloric deficit, you can either do however long you need to be on the elliptical or whatever cardio method you choose to burn that 350 calories, or you could just not eat the bagel and you'd still be in the exact same place from a caloric perspective, right?
Right.
So that's the one point we're trying to make. And the other point we're trying to make is that it doesn't mean you just have to live and die by cardio. But if you like it and you want to get more extra calorie expenditure and you want to have additional aerobic benefits from it, which, by the way, strength training does help increase your aerobic benefit. There is aerobic benefits to anaerobic training because you can't go anaerobic until you've gone through the aerobic level. Then you can certainly add in cardio to complement it. But it doesn't mean you have to organize your workouts around cardio as if it's a magic answer for fat loss.
My next question, Nick, sets and reps. Can you give our listeners an overview on how to utilize sets and reps effectively?
Well, for the goal of fat loss or just in general now, and if you can give me a little more specifics.
Yeah, if you could start general maybe and then talk specifically for fat loss.
Well, I would say if you're someone who's already exercising, so let's say you have someone exercises a few times a week. A lot of people want to ask, what are the best sets and reps for A, B, or C goal, strength or fat loss or to build muscle? I would say that it's what the research says, really. The research shows that if you're just trying to build muscle, really any set or rep range will be just as effective as the other as long as you take it to close to failure, right? So 5 sets of 10 or 10 sets of 5 still ends up being 50 total reps as long as you get close to failure on each one. From a muscle gain perspective, you'll end up with, the research shows you'll end up with about the exact same results. Now, if you're trying to build strength, which means, focus on increasing how much weight you can lift or how much force you can produce, well then 10 sets of 5 would be more effective than 5 sets of 10 if maximizing strength is your goal, because you're working with heavier lifts, heavier weights. Doing sets of 5 with a weight that's heavier than sets of 10. If you're short on time and strength is not your main goal, well then 5 sets of 10, right? Or even, I'm just trying to do the math right now, or even 3 sets of 15, right? Or 3 sets of 17 if you're trying to get around the 50 number. All right, it may do it. So again, it's very goal specific. If you're looking to kind of be all around, well then mix it up. Some days do heavier weights, more sets. Other time, 5 sets of 5 reps. Other times do 2 sets of 25 reps. Other times do 3 sets of 12 reps. There is not a magic muscle building range, although that being said, looking at all the research, most people will stick around that 8 to 15 range. And that's a pretty good neutral rep range to build muscle and increase some strength.
Right. Great stuff. Now, you've written a ton of stuff in fitness magazines for both men and women, with, of course, years of training both. Can you give our listeners some insight into what is different and what is not when it comes to workouts for men and women?
Man, you're asking really relevant, really great questions, man. Well, I would say this. The first thing is that if you go on Google and you type in certain exercises, ab exercises or leg exercises, you'll normally see when the Google kind of fills things in, it'll say like for men or for women, as if a lot of people have searched that. Well, let's clarify that right now. There is no such thing as there is no men's exercises and women's exercises. There are just exercises, upper body, lower body, core, whatever. All right, let's clarify that. Now, what exercises that you focus on, prioritize most, prioritize least, come down to 2 things: personal preference and goals. It is true that women, when it comes to body shaping type, tend to favor their lower body, glutes, legs. Guys tend to favor their upper body. But that's not a men's exercise or a women's exercise. It just means that they're more interested in developing muscle groups in certain areas. So if there is specificity towards your sex in regards to programming, how you organize your exercises, which ones you do, focus on, don't do more, do less, it would be based off of what preferences you have that you want to develop, not not based on your sex in general. So last thing I'll say about this is that when you write for magazines, a lot of times there's a men's version and a women's version of some of these exercise magazines. Well, when it's a regular practice to have me write an article, and then let's say it goes in the men's magazine, and then 6 months later, that same article's in the women's magazine, except the terminologies are changed in regards to the title, and in regards to, they'll say, like, for example, in the men's version, they'll say, do this leg workout to get ripped and, powerful legs to outlast the competition. And in the women's version, it'll say to get lean and shapely, legs of a goddess. Same exact workout, same exact rep ranges. And guess what? Neither one of them are lying. Because the body only has one way to develop. Your muscles either atrophy or hypertrophy. They either shrink, stay the same, or increase their shape, which is get bigger. So human physiology is human physiology. But terminologies are very sex specific, that what we resonate with more or less.
Love that. And to our listeners, Nick has just about written for every single popular fitness magazine out there. So he's definitely giving you the insight on that.
Yeah. And let me just clarify quick for some people. The whole idea, and it is terminology, but it's not. This whole idea of, that's a bulking exercise versus a toning exercise. Excuse my language. That is absolute bullshit. There is no such physiological reality of that. There is no physiological way your muscles develop tone versus size. No, your muscles either hypertrophy or atrophy or stay the same. That's a physiological, non-negotiable reality. Now, when we say shapely or toned, what we're really saying is someone who has a hypertrophied muscle, which means it's more developed, and they're lean. That's what that is. So in that case, yeah, that's just descriptive terms. But it becomes a problem when you think certain exercises develop a muscle, or don't develop a muscle in a certain way, or only develop it by shape. And that's just physiologically impossible.
And Nick, we might as well just address something here too that comes up all the time on this topic, the whole concept of spot reduction. Can you talk about that?
Well, I actually posted this on my Facebook the other day. I've said it before, that you can't spot reduce with resistance training, but you sure as heck can spot enhance, right? So if you want to reduce your abdominal fat, well, all the crunches in the world aren't going to help you do that any better than just doing other exercises, because it really comes down to being in a caloric deficit. You can't target the fat off that area by doing exercises around that same area. That's what's the proposition of spot reduction is all about. However, if you want to develop perkier glutes, then you got to do glute exercises. And by the way, just to create some clarity here about this, going back to the toning thing, when women say they want perkier, more lifted, shapelier glutes, that's no different than a guy saying he wants bigger biceps. Just the terms are different. What he's really saying is, I want perkier, more lifted biceps. It is the exact same want. It's just they use different terms. They both want a more well-developed, muscle group in that area. It's just the terms they use. All right, so you can spot enhance by doing resistance training, but spot reduction has been demonstrated to be false across many research studies. Where they'll do just quadriceps exercises and then measure the body fat reduction over the course of the entire body, and it's no more in the quadriceps than anywhere else in the body. Same thing has been done multiple times with abdominal exercises. Again, physiologically impossible. It's not how your body works. I want to clarify one thing about the spot reduction thing. There has been some articles written in the last 7-8 years that actually try to make the claim that spot reduction is real. There is some research that shows that when you work a muscle group, that you increase heat, in the local area of that area, and that may help mobilize fat. All right? And there is some research to demonstrate that, and that's been written to say, spot reduction is real. So I'm saying this just in case anybody's read those articles and think, well, Nick doesn't know that science. Mm-hmm. I'm well aware of it. The problem is, if that was true, then it would have shown up in the research that looked at that did the body fat measurements after doing specific exercises, whether it be for the quad or for the abdominals. So even if it is true, and it probably is, that you are increasing heat in the area of where you're making the muscles activate, and maybe that does increase some level of fat transport, it's so insignificant that it doesn't show up to any level that makes it worthwhile to even try to attempt to spot reduce.
Thanks for bringing that up. You're always on top of the latest research. So a lot of people are busy with life and are limited with time, whether it's work, family, the kids. Can you talk about workout intensity versus duration? Sometimes they feel like, oh, if I can't work out for, hour and a half, an hour, 6 days a week, I'm just not going to do anything, right? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's really not much to talk about in just regard. Just say that's just not really a reasonable way to take it. You do what you can do. You meet yourself where you're at, and you do the best you can. And doing something is better than nothing. I mean, no, every one of those was like super coach speak, super cliche, but they're all legitimate.
Right.
And the best thing is we all know this. Once you start something, it's much easier to build from it. You get momentum going. And the hardest thing is getting started. So if getting started, it means 15 minutes, then it's much easier to build that into 20 and 25 minutes than it is to get started from zero to go to 30 minutes, which a lot of people think they got to try to do, which is why they don't stick with it. They don't meet themselves where they're at. And part of that, again, is the fault of the fitness. People to feel like, well, if you're not doing an extreme workout and you're not organizing your life around kitchens and gyms, you might as well not even bother. And that's just a false narrative.
Now, I want to switch gears a little bit on the nutrition side. You dedicate one chapter in your book about this. You mentioned complementary eating. Can you get into your overall approach to nutrition, and maybe you can get into specifics of complementary eating?
Sure. So the first thing I need to say is I'm not a dietitian, although that chapter was reviewed by a dietitian before we could publish it. So, and there's research references there as well. The whole idea of complementary eating, first off, that's just a term. It's, I know people like those kind of, terminologies. It doesn't really mean anything beyond just a cool term. It really is just about getting you to eat more whole foods. And if you tend to eat more whole foods, because they tend to be lower in calories, you tend to be in a caloric deficit. So even though I talk about the importance of a caloric deficit, because it's pretty much a non-negotiable fact, I do recommend not taking the calorie counting approach at first, because it's a pain in the butt. And a lot of times you don't need it if you just focus on the nutrient density of the foods, because they tend to be higher quality nutrient dense foods tend to be, less in calories anyway. So for the most people, that's where it spells success. So now the complementary eating aspect is really just providing a strategy to do it, where you try to create more of a balanced meal with carbs, fats, proteins, and things. You certainly don't need to follow that. There's lots of approaches. This is the subjective nature of dieting, okay, or of eating, nutrition, where the reason why you can read testimonials from just about most every diet book and fad diet that's out there, and they're probably not wrong, they're probably not lies, they're probably legitimate testimonials. It's not really because the diet book provides a magic formula that the other ones do not. It's just simply that they get you to eat more nutrient dense foods and you end up in a caloric deficit. And there's lots of ways to go about that best fit with your lifestyle and your preferences. Now, when I say preferences, everybody wants to joke and, well, my preference is to eat pizza and chocolate cake all day. Ha ha. All right. Well, that's not what we mean. We mean, like, if you're someone who prefers higher protein, like if you're a meatitarian type person, well, then maybe a very high protein, lower carb diet may work for you. If you're someone who really likes carbohydrates, well, maybe, an increased, having more carbohydrates than some other people may be fine for you as well. In fact, the research does show that as well. When you match protein and calories are matched as well, a higher carb or higher fat diet end up with the same fat loss. So again, not a magic, the whole carbs aren't the devil kind of mentality there.
I got a few more questions for you. For the listeners who want to hire a personal trainer, what advice can you give them for finding the right trainer?
I would say the first thing to do is do not fall for the myth that the best looking trainer, and I don't necessarily mean the most handsome or beautiful in the face, I mean, physical, the most physically imposing or impressive or strongest person in the training staff is the most knowledgeable. In fact, I would say that and again, this is going to be, my own observation, but I get to work with thousands of trainers now. I travel the world teaching trainers, and I had a gym for years. That rarely do I find that the best trainers that you'd want, the most intelligent ones that make it about you, that have the most knowledge, rarely do I find that those are the ones who are, ready to get behind the camera for a modeling shoot. Normally what I find is the ones who, and again, this is a generalization. Normally when you find someone who's super into competing in powerlifting or competing in physique training or whatever, the problem is that takes so much time and mental energy that all that time they're spending on that means that's not time they're spending learning about how to be a better fitness professional for other people. All right? So that's a huge myth that you don't want to fall for. So playing off of that is you want to ask questions such as, here is my goal, how would we approach something like that? Have you worked with anybody like this before? How did you approach it with them? Do you have any testimonials? Anybody that I could email or talk to that worked with you, that I could hear a little bit about their, experience? And then also ask a question, how would your approach for my goal, for me, be different than with somebody else? Because if they're not going to give you an individualized routine, then you might as well just go to a group class and spend a heck of a lot less money. And a lot of trainers end up giving the exact same thing to everybody because it's their bias and it's not really individualized. And that's the value, which is why you pay a lot more money for individualized training.
And I also want to flip that question, Nick. What can people do to be better clients or students of a trainer?
Man, great question. Well, first I would say I have realistic expectations in regards to what a trainer can and can't do. A trainer is not Harry Potter. It's not Make-A-Wish Foundation. You have to be realistic in what you can and can't achieve. I would also say that it's something that you do that the trainer does not do to you. It's something that that you do with the trainer does with you, and that you can really enhance or you really complement is probably a better term, or not complement what you do with the trainer by what you do outside the gym with your lifestyle, sleeping and stress and eating and things of that nature. So we tend to think that, oh, well, I have this trainer and the trainer's supposed to do all these things for me. No, all they can really do is provide you leadership and program design and motivation if that's what you're there for. But that's 23 hours if you're training an hour. It's 23 hours out of a 24-hour day.
Well, we're just about out of time, but before we go, if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Well, the best thing is to find me on my website. There's two web addresses that take you to the same website. So one is my name, nicktuminello.com. 2 M's, 2 L's, that's long, and Italian name, it's hard to memorize and know how to spell. So if you just go to performanceu.net. Now when I say Performance U, I mean the letter U. It's short for Performance University. performanceu.net, and takes you to the website, and that talks about speaking schedule and books and blog posts and all the other cool stuff we got going on.
Nick, great stuff. Again, the book is Strength Training for Fat Loss, and he also has another book out called Building Muscle and Performance. Go get it at your local bookstore or Amazon. His website, again, nicktuminello.com, or Performance U, which is an amazing resource with tons of information. Nick, thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
All right. I hope you guys got a lot out of that episode. I want to thank Nick again for taking the time to come on and sharing everything that he did. If you want to get the show notes for the episode and everything else we mentioned, you can head over to anchorsofhealth.com/episode 1. I'll catch you guys on the next episode. Peace.